My name is Lila, and I just graduated from high school. I live, or should I say lived, with my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, in a modest two-story house in Pennsylvania. There's also my older brother Jake, though he moved out a few years ago to a nearby city. He's 25 now, 7 years older than me, and has always been the golden child of our family. Growing up, I watched how my parents bent over backwards to give Jake everything he wanted. If he showed even the slightest interest in something, they'd jump at the chance to support him. Hockey? They bought him the most expensive gear. Drawing? The finest art supplies. Skateboarding? A custom-made board. It didn't matter that he'd get bored after a few months and move on to the next thing, they were always ready to fund his next adventure. I remember this one Christmas that really stuck with me. Jake's birthday is a week before Christmas, and that year, when he turned 16, my parents bought him this super expensive gaming computer he'd been talking about nonstop. Must have cost them a fortune. Come Christmas morning, all I got was a card saying Merry Christmas. They said they'd run out of money. That's pretty much how it always went. Jake's birthdays were these huge celebrations with awesome presents, and I'd get whatever was left over at Christmas, if anything at all. My parents never really bothered with my birthdays. A small cake, maybe a new shirt or some school supplies, that was about it. No parties, no celebrations, nothing special. That's why I was completely thrown off when they sat me down in our living room last week, just days after my graduation. Lila, Mom said, smoothing her shirt like she always does when she's trying to appear casual, we've been thinking. You're turning 18 soon, and it's a big milestone. We want to throw you a proper party. I nearly choked on my coffee. A party? I asked, sure I must have heard wrong. Dad nodded, looking unusually enthusiastic. Yes, sweetheart. We'll invite the whole family, make it a real celebration. I sat there, staring at them both, trying to figure out what the catch was. My parents aren't the type to suddenly change their ways without a reason. Something was up, I could feel it in my gut. Why now? I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. You've never wanted to throw me a party before. Well, you're graduating high school, going to college soon, Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. It's different now. You're becoming an adult. I nodded slowly, but something didn't feel right. The way they were acting, the sudden interest in celebrating my birthday, it was all too convenient. But I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was wrong. Over the next few days, I actually started getting excited about the party. Maybe I'd been too quick to judge my parents' intentions. After all, it made sense, I was turning 18, had just graduated with honors, and was heading off to college soon. Perhaps they'd finally realized that I deserved some recognition too. I kept catching Mom on the phone, talking in hushed tones about party arrangements. She was ordering a fancy cake from the local bakery, planning out decorations, and putting together a guest list. Dad seemed unusually invested too, cleaning up the backyard and fixing that wobbly patio furniture he'd been ignoring for months. Do you need any help? I offered one afternoon, finding Mom in the kitchen surrounded by party planning notes. She jumped slightly, quickly shuffling some papers together. No, sweetie. We want this to be a surprise. Just focus on enjoying your special day. I shrugged and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. Okay, if you're sure. By the way, is Jake coming? Of course he is, Mom replied, but something in her voice sounded off. He wouldn't miss his little sister's big day. I wanted to believe her, but Jake hadn't returned any of my texts in the past week. Typical Jake, really, always too busy with his own life to care about anyone else's. 2 days before the party, I was heading downstairs to get a glass of water when I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. I normally wouldn't eavesdrop, but something in Dad's tone made me pause at the top of the stairs. David, are you sure everything will be perfect? Mom's voice was tense. Your mother is very particular about these things. I froze. Grandma Eleanor was coming? She lived in Massachusetts and rarely visited us. The last time I'd seen her was almost 2 years ago. Sarah, we have to make this work, Dad replied urgently. Mom needs to see that we're making an effort with Lila. You know how she gets about how we treat the kids. I know. She's always going on about how we favor Jake. And we can't afford to upset her right now. That money she gave us last year is the only thing keeping us afloat. If she decides to stop helping us. Their voices dropped lower, but I'd heard enough. Everything suddenly made sense, the sudden interest in my birthday, the elaborate party plans, all of it. This wasn't about me at all. This was about impressing Grandma Eleanor. I slid down to sit on the top step, my throat tight with disappointment. Grandma Eleanor had always been different from my parents. She saw through Jake's charm and actually paid attention to me. Every time she visited, she'd point out how unfairly my parents treated me compared to Jake. And I knew she was wealthy. She lived in this beautiful historic house in Massachusetts and had helped my parents financially several times over the years. The pieces all fell into place. My parents weren't throwing this party to celebrate my achievements or to make up for years of neglect. They were doing it to put on a show for Grandma Eleanor, to convince her they were good parents who treated both their children equally. They were trying to secure their financial lifeline. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to the sound of voices and my mother's overly cheerful tone floating up from outside. I peered through my bedroom window and my heart leaped. There was Grandma Eleanor, climbing out of her practical Toyota Camry. I threw on some clothes and rushed downstairs, nearly colliding with Dad in the hallway. The moment she saw me, Grandma Eleanor's face lit up with genuine warmth, something I hadn't seen much of in our house lately. She opened her arms wide, and I practically ran into them. There's my beautiful girl. She hugged me tight, smelling of fresh-baked cookies and that mild lavender soap she always used. When she pulled back, her eyes were sparkling. Let me look at you properly. A high school graduate already. What's next for you, sweetheart? We moved into the living room, where Mom had already arranged the furniture to look like something out of a home decor magazine. I sat next to Grandma on the sofa while my parents perched nervously on the edge of their seats. Well, I started, trying to ignore my mother's intense stare. I actually got accepted to several colleges. 2 of them offered me spots. That's wonderful. Grandma squeezed my hand. Tell me about them. The state university offered me a full scholarship, I explained, watching my parents nod approvingly. And then there's Brington College. I hesitated, knowing my parents thought this option was off the table. It's a really prestigious private school, but the tuition is about $25,000 a year. Grandma Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, a small smile playing at her lips. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression made me wonder if she was already forming plans of her own. The doorbell started ringing as guests arrived, first Aunt Marie and Uncle Bob, then my cousins, followed by some family friends. Mom rushed around, playing the perfect hostess, while Dad manned the grill in the backyard. But there was one person notably absent, Jake. I tried calling him 3 times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I asked my mom about him, and she replied he was busy with his auto parts company, but would definitely find time to congratulate me later. The party was in full swing by mid-afternoon. The backyard was filled with the chatter of relatives, family friends, and the smell of grilled food. I tried to enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the weird vibe coming from my parents. They kept hovering around Grandma Eleanor like anxious satellites, making sure her glass was always full and her plate never empty. I was just finishing a piece of birthday cake when Grandma Eleanor suddenly stood up, tapping her fork against her glass. The chatter died down as everyone turned to look at her. I'd like to say something, she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. Today, we're celebrating not just Lila's 18th birthday, but also her acceptance into college. She smiled warmly at me. Lila, honey, I've watched you grow up into an incredible young woman. Unlike some people, she paused meaningfully, you've always worked hard and never taken anything for granted. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I could see Mom's fingers nervously shredding a paper napkin. When you told me about your acceptance to Brington College, Grandma continued, I could see how much you wanted to go there, even though you thought it was out of reach. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. That's why I've decided to give you a special gift. She walked over and handed me the envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a check. When I saw the amount, I thought I was seeing things wrong. I blinked and looked again. $100,000, Grandma announced to the stunned crowd. Enough to cover your tuition at Brington College. The silence lasted for about 3 seconds, before erupting into chaos. Aunt Marie let out a gasp that could have sucked in half the oxygen in the yard. Uncle Bob started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. My cousins were whooping and cheering. I just sat there, staring at the check through tears that wouldn't stop falling. This wasn't just money, it was freedom, opportunity, a chance to go to my dream school without drowning in debt. Grandma, I choked out, standing up to hug her. I can't believe, thank you so much. From the corner of my eye, I could see my parents. They weren't clapping. Mom's face had gone pale, and Dad looked like he'd been hit with a brick. They were whispering to each other, their heads close together, occasionally shooting glances at the check in my hands. I spent most of the evening talking with Grandma Eleanor. She told me stories about her college days and gave me advice about living on campus. It felt like the first time someone in my family was actually excited about my future. The guests gradually filtered out as evening fell, leaving behind empty plates and half-full cups. Grandma Eleanor decided to spend the night, saying she was too tired to drive home. I helped her set up in our guest room, grateful for a few more hours with her. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, Grandma hugged me tight and headed home, promising to call soon to help me plan for college. I watched her car disappear down the street, still hardly believing what had happened. It wasn't until that evening that Jake finally showed up. He walked in without knocking, looking like he'd been sucking on lemons. His expensive designer clothes were wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Happy birthday, sis, he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. No hug, no card, not even a token gift. He headed straight for the kitchen where our parents were, leaving me standing in the hallway. That evening, the atmosphere at the dinner table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake sat across from me, slouched in his chair and playing with his phone. Dad cleared his throat several times before finally speaking. Lila, honey, we need to have a serious family discussion, he began, setting down his fork. Your brother's been going through a difficult time. His auto parts business, well, things haven't been going as planned. Jake suddenly looked up from his phone, his face drawn. The banks are breathing down my neck, he muttered. I took out some loans to expand the business, but the market crashed, and now they want their money back. I couldn't help but scoff. Really? Because your Instagram shows you vacationing in Hawaii, just last month. With different girls in every photo, by the way. Stay out of my social media, Jake snapped, his face reddening. That's none of your business. Calm down, both of you, Dad interrupted. Lila, this is serious. Your brother could lose everything. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. What does any of this have to do with me? Mom and Dad exchanged one of their loaded looks, the kind that made it clear they'd rehearsed this conversation. Well, sweetheart, Mom said, her voice honey-sweet, family always helps family. That's what we've always taught you, right? My blood ran cold as I started to understand where this was going. We think, Dad continued, that the money Grandma gave you could really help Jake out of this situation. I stared at them in disbelief. You want me to give Jake my college money? It makes perfect sense, Jake chimed in, suddenly animated. My business is established. It's more important than some college degree you might not even use. That money is for my education, I protested, my voice rising. Grandma gave it to me specifically for Brington. You got a full ride to state, Mom countered. You can still go to college. But Jake needs this money now. No, the word came out firm and clear. That money is mine. Grandma gave it to me. The change in their faces was instant. Dad exploded out of his chair, his hand clamping around my wrist like a vice. He yanked me away from the table, ignoring my cry of pain. "You'll go to your room right now," he snarled, dragging me toward the stairs. "And you'll stay there until you come to your senses. Don't even think about calling your grandmother. If you breathe a word of